All right, we are live. What's up, y'all? Audience, good to see you all again. I am in a different location. My background looks totally different. Excuse the noise that you may hear coming from the outside. I just landed in Atlanta earlier today, doing some business for work, and then I'm back on the plane tomorrow, headed to Philadelphia for a presentation. Um, for work as well. So it's going good, moving and shaking. Still COVID. I still traveling with my mask, y'all. Don't think that I'm out here, no mask. But glad you can join us again tonight. This is part 5 of our series, Unspoken Truths on Why You Are Single. We have been talking, I think, Fred and Marv, primarily to women, specifically women in the Black community, who are desirous of relationships, but have, like the research, Pew Research Center and other extensive research, the research shows that particularly Black women have a harder time dating, finding suitable daters, suitable men to date, than the majority of folks who are not in the Black community. And we've touched on reasons why. I mean, research shows that being gainfully employed helps. Having degrees and backgrounds that are steeped in culture and rich in diversity, those things are super helpful when looking for a relationship. But in the Black community, it doesn't always pan out because Black men may not have some of those degrees or the background or the experience that many Black women may be looking for. So tonight, for the first time in the show in the last 6 months, we're talking about a terminology that I've often read about, but never really knew enough about to have a discussion about it. Marv is here. He's our psychologist, and Fred. We have a small group tonight because I really want to keep this conversation very intimate, and make sure that we focus on what's important. Oddly, oddly. Guy from the front that asked me what my name is. They're supposed to check me in a long time ago. Here I'm still waiting on my key cards. But anyway, we're dealing with emotional intelligence, and I think we know what artificial intelligence is. We know the geniuses of the world and what metrics and rubrics go into naming those geniuses. But Fred and Marv, I don't think that we know a lot about emotional intelligence. I don't think we, as people in the Black community, we've never really had a lot of conversations about being emotional, about being sensitive, about how that looks, how we're portrayed, and not being macho, and how letting go of some of that macho-ness may actually prove to be exactly what women in relationships are desirous of. So, Marv, what I'd like you to do, just kick us off really quick. Give us a kind of like a definition. I know you have a textbook definition because that's that you are, but also give us a layman's term definition, how this ties into dating in the 21st century, specifically dating in the Black community.
Well, I guess the textbook definition is of emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of and control or express one's emotions and handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. So to put that in layman terms, there's 5 components of it. One is being self-aware, one is being self-regulatory, one is your motivations, one is empathy, and then the last one is your social skills, dealing with others. So that's the more or less the breakdown of emotional intelligence as per the textbook and the layman's terms.
All right, so give it to us again because I want to move through this rather judiciously. So the definition, but then let's pause at number one.
Well, the definition, the capacity to be aware of and control and express one's emotions. So it's understanding that breakdown that you might be mad over something and you're taking it out on something else. Like it's that, I guess the classic, and I don't want anybody in Peter to actually jump down my throat, but it's that classic where you might be mad at work and then so you come home and you kick the dog or the cat you know what I mean? But so that you're transferring that negative energy. So your emotional intelligence would understand that your issue is not with the animal. The issue is with what went on at work. And so you're aware of where your emotional issues start at.
So the awareness. So does that mean more of that because I know that I had a rough day at work, or that my boss jumped down my throat, or that the merger acquisition didn't go through, the job I was applying for didn't work out? Does that mean that because I'm aware of that, I can hold on to those emotions for walking into the door and taking it out on someone in my house that's not responsible for what I'm feeling?
Correct. That's absolutely. It's keeping that is keeping that issue. I wouldn't say keeping it within yourself, but not transferring it from, you know what I mean, that initial issue to then becoming, well, you know what I mean, the spouse made chicken and you wanted burgers, and so now it's a 3 hour argument because chickens was made rather than burgers. Whereas at the end of the day, it was really the fact that everything that went on at work is what really put the, as some people say, the battery in your back, and then now you're just mad and you're just trying to take it out. So it's understanding that, because what happens in relationships is, when you're with a person long enough, it allows for that person to share time with you, and within that sharing of time, sometimes it you can transfer that kind of negative energy, and it can continuously create problems. So it's learning how to separate what's wrong at work with what's wrong at home, so it's not always a problem, and what's learning to separate certain issues, underlining issues, from other issues, so that you can learn how to properly process what's going on with you and deal with
Yeah.
the folks within your world.
That's good to be aware and properly process. So, Fred, I want to bring this next question to you, because I think that Marv did a great job of, like, point number one, being aware and being able to process. I know I've had some bad days at work. I know that there was some bad news given to me prior to stepping foot into the house. But as a man who's not been taught how to process emotions, what advice, Fred, do you have for the man who receives bad news prior to coming home and having to emotionally, like, separate himself from work and home?
Well, Mom touched on a very a really salient point, in that the common denominator for any emotional intelligence situation that you encounter is you, right? You're always there. You're always a part of the equation. You're always a variable in any equation or any situation that you encounter. So, what baggage you bring into it is going to affect your perception of it, right? Uh, he spoke seriously, articulately about how you may bring home bad news, anxiety, distress, and take it out on your loved ones without recognizing it. So, a large component of emotional intelligence as it relates to you is how your emotions are affecting your behavior. What I would suggest, and what most people have sort of figured out, well, maybe I shouldn't speak so freely, maybe not all or most people, but is to take a moment of self check. I think it's a good idea to assess what you're bringing home, especially if you're the type of person who comes home and you internalize your day's events. I'm someone who doesn't come home and rehash the events of my job. Number one, it would be difficult to try to articulate because it's technical and medical, and I'd have to explain a lot of things. So it's not advantageous to me to come home and start talking work. It's also very emotionally and ethically challenging to talk about some of the things that I have to talk about. So it's difficult, and it's easy to internalize some very stressful encounters and circumstances that I go through at work. What I used to do personally is stop. If alcohol is not a problem for you, or stopping by a bar, whatever is not a problem for you, whatever it takes for you to decompress for a moment before coming home and bringing the stresses of your day home is what I might suggest. It doesn't have to involve alcohol. It doesn't have to involve drugs. It could be a stop by a park. It could be the long way home, right? It could be talking to somebody on the phone on the way home to kind of have an emotional dump, just so you don't come home fully charged with the stress and anxiety of the day's events. Because what could happen is you unload or unload the anxiety and stress on your kids because you open your front door and you find shoes where they shouldn't be, a book bag dropped off in the front of the door, dinner's not ready yet, the TV's on the wrong channel instead of the game, you know what I mean? The dog needs to be walked, they're barking. There are things that are just lovely, wonderful parts of family life that may be stresses for you right now, because what you really need is peace and quiet. It may be what you desire, maybe not what you want, but it's what you need. So if you need to find something that allows you to dump some emotion, to dump some stress, not necessarily recharge, because I would hope that your family recharges you, but what you need is a delayed response or a delayed approach to the house. So if that means taking the long way there, take the long way there. If there's a scenic route, take it. If it means putting on some music that's soothing, take it. If it means putting on some head banging music that just lets you get in the car and do this and bang your head and break your neck for a while, whatever it takes, find an outlet for this aggression, the stuff that you kept pent up, the stuff that you didn't tell your boss, the stuff you didn't tell your colleagues, the frustration that you had to mask. Find an outlet for it before you get home.
That's a good point, Fred. I want to follow up on that real quick, because what I do is, for me, I think the walking of the dog is the great. All right, I come in, I grab the dog, and then we take a nice long mile walk. So it allows me to, if I need to play it out, whatever I went through, I play it out, and then by the time I've come back, 30 minutes have passed by, 45 minutes has passed by. Me and the dog have walked everywhere. Maybe something happened on the walk that's changed my whole outlook on it. And then now, you're a whole new person. You come in all smiles, ready to rock and roll.
Just an opportunity to breathe deeply, and ungrip the steering wheel. You know what I mean?
Right, which is actually the self-regulation part of it as well, because the self-awareness and the self-regulation. So now you know to take it off of hyperdrive because of work, and then now I'm at home. So I don't know if you guys have learned how to drive a stick shift, but it's like downshifting. You know what I mean? You're going from 5. You in an area where you see the cops, so you're going from 5th gear down to 2nd gear, just so you could cruise through. So.
Yeah, both of you make some really good points, and I'm thinking about just my own life, and I'm remembering what a mentor told me years ago, and it was a great female mentor of mine. She's the president of a college now. She said, when you need that space and that time to yourself, communicate that to your spouse, and then put a time period on it. Didn't quite understand why, but you just can't be like, yo, I'm about to go leave work and go get a drink. I'll be home when I be home. That creates more problems, right, than you really want. And you really don't need all night. You know you don't. So, okay, hey, babe, I want to go to the park for 30 minutes when I get off work. I need to really decompress. I need to really kind of push out my day so that when I come home to you and to the family, that you have 100% of it. I think that she will receive that a lot more than, to your point, Fred, I'm going to happy hour, or I'm going to the hookah lounge, or I'm going to fight night, right? Communicate that you need that time to decompress and give a window of time you need so that she understands that, okay, this is what he's doing, so that he can become the best version of him.
Because if you're stopping by the bar for 2 hours, that's an excuse. That's avoidance technique. It shouldn't take you 2 hours to decompress, and it shouldn't take you 4 drinks to decompress. That's the wrong coping mechanism.
And the thing is, do you recognize? Are you at the level where you even recognize that there's some underlying issues, and that's why you're stopping at the bar 2-3 hours, or that's why it seemed like your whole day was filled with anger because it started off with something in the morning, and then that spilled over to you taking that anger into work, and then that spilled over into now you bringing that anger back home. Do you even realize, okay, it might have started off with something in the morning and it started these chain of events? Because you can, as we're talking about it, you can bring home anger to work. You bring your problems from home to work. And so it's being able to recognize, okay, how do I build this wall so that I stop one problem from becoming problems in multiple worlds?
So that's the self-regulation part. I'm gonna put that up. That's part two of your definition. I think, Marv, you had like 5 areas.
Correct.
First area was being aware, right?
Yeah, self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Now, I think that's huge for brothers who don't know that. Let's just put out there that they have anger issues. For brothers who don't know that, something's triggered or set them off, but they can't figure out what the trigger was. So being aware that your trigger may not be who's at home, your trigger may be what you experienced prior to getting home, right? So talk about the second part, which is the self-regulation part, because once we are aware, and I know I'm aware, I know when I'm having a good day, I can take the scenic route home. I can stop off at the park and watch the ducks or the geese, right? But I need to communicate that. Number two, the self-regulation piece is important because, Fred, as you mentioned, when you walk in the house and you thought that you dealt with the day, and you walk in the house and you see laundry everywhere, this and this thing, you know what I'm saying? The bed ain't made, you know what I'm saying? The kids look like they ain't even washed in 2 days. That stuff may come back, right? So in that moment, Marv, walk us through how to self-regulate once we become aware.
Well, personally, what I do, and I guess this is ironic, just because of this past weekend I went to New York, so went to go visit my father's gravesite, and this is where I actually came up with this actual theory that I practice within myself. So my best self-regulation is conversation I have with myself in the mirror. So I know, because when at the end of the day, how they say you can't bullshit a bullshitter. The hardest person to ever lie to is yourself. You know what I mean? If it's someone else and you're trying to get away with something, it's easy to try to figure out how to smirk and how to lie. But when you standing looking at yourself eye to eye, it makes it hard to lie to yourself. So for me, it allows me to be like, okay, Marv, what's the real problem? You know what I mean? What's wrong? You know what I mean? Like, is it really, as Fred said, you came home and there's shoes on the floor, laundry wasn't done? Or is it the fact that, my coworker stole my idea and now he's getting a promotion over me? You know what I mean? Or is it the fact that I'm just tired of being at this job overall? Or could it be something even deeper, like, something that goes within my past, within my upbringing, that I still haven't regulated and I've just been carrying overall. So for me, it's that self-regulation is always staring at myself eye to eye, knowing that, like, I can't boast the person on the other side of this mirror. So I got to keep it 100 and then some.
But Marv and Doc, so many people can. You are not the common brother. EI, emotional intelligence, or a high EQ, a high emotional quotient, is not common. And for reasons that we'll get into throughout the rest of the program, but so many people do BS themselves. So many people don't want to look honestly at themselves. So many people look in the mirror and they see what they want to see, not the reality of who they are and the list of their problems and the list of their traumas. And so many people don't understand the things that have shaped them and molded them to be the amalgam of just problems and contradictions and confusion that they are. But you're on the show for a reason, because you have evolved to the point where you can actually talk about it, man. But it takes a serious point of introspection for people to actually look really clearly at themselves. And that's the only way I think that you can remove yourself from the consideration of issues like when you get home and things are not the way you think they should be. And the first thing you want to do is jump down somebody's throat rather than wonder why, if your wife has been home, well, what kind of problems could she have had that the dishes are not washed, that the children are not fed, that the dogs have not been walked? When the first thing you think about yourself, about in every circumstance, is yourself and how you feel, you're missing something. You're missing several components of a high emotional quotient or a high emotional intelligence. So it's not a common thing, and having a high EI is not as prestigious or highly regarded as having a high IQ. But people with high IQs end up being less successful socially a lot of times and less happy a lot of times than people with high EQs and lower IQs.
Yeah, I think part of that too, bro, you make a really good point. And I love how Marv said, looking in the mirror. And then, Fred, you talk about how hard it is to have a high EI. It's like how hard it is to have a high EQ. I think part of that comes with accepting truth and accepting reality. I was just Tracy last night. I said to her, I said, for a lot of years, my first 3 years in college, I was not a good student, and I'm gonna tell you why. Right? It was me being self-aware. These many years later, I was so focused on basketball. The more hours I spend in the gym, eventually I would make the team or I get a chance to play overseas. I was putting in more hours in the court day after day, playing 7 days a week, hours and hours and hours. However, although I was a good player, I was not good enough for Division 1. I had D2 scholarship offers, D3 scholarship offers, but I wanted to go D1.
Mm-hmm.
Years that I put in practicing, I wasn't good enough for D1, and I was not facing the harsh reality that, Jason, you're not good enough for this level here. However, you can channel all this great energy you put in 7 days a week into your academics, and you can excel and thrive really well. And I did that my junior year. Fast forward, master's degree, fast forward, PhD, right? Education is something that I found in science on how to do well. But the harsh reality and the harsh truth was I'm not that good of a player to play at Division 1. The hard reality and the hard truth for men is we don't have it all together emotionally, and we don't want to admit that. We don't want to say that we have a bad day or we're carrying too much weight or we feel overwhelmed or we're exhausted by life or we've been hit one too many times in the chin at work and we can keep taking it. We don't want to admit that, yo, it's tough. I'm upset. I'm frustrated. I feel like crying. Some days I want to quit, but I'm thinking about I have to take care of my family. We don't want to be that emotional, right? But I think, Marv, to your point, being aware and then being able to communicate that awareness actually brings strength to us as men. Now, I could be wrong, but I think we face that harsh reality and harsh truth that we ain't always got it all put together, and some of our energy is expended into the wrong areas, and we could channel it and move it to areas that mean us well. I think we'd be better off.
I truly believe that and concur. Like that's how I fell into psychology because when I went to college, I was and Fred, we were talking about this earlier. I was a bio pre-med major. You know what I mean? My going off to college was a little different due to certain circumstances, but you know what I mean. I saw that my first semester freshman year, I went to a school that had no real athletics, so most of my time I spent playing spades. Earning money just to eat at night, like just because I was a poor broke student. But it was when I got the worst GPA I think known to mankind, and, and I'm sitting there looking at it and thinking like, am I gonna go back home and live with my mama? And at the end of the day, that was the fear and the motivation. It was playing the spades, and you young, you in college, talking, chasing young girls. And I had a friend of mine tell me, she pulled me to the side. Now I credit her for this. She said, Marvin, understand this, that all of these young women see you talking to every young woman out here, and at the end of the day, they'll smile in your face, they'll be happy with you, they'll flirt with you, but in 3-4 years, when they walking out of here with their degrees and you'll have nothing, they'll look back at you and laugh. And those two fears for me is what kept me pushing. It was like, you know what, I'm not going to let this GPA, when I tell you the worst one known to mankind, be what marks my life. I'm gonna pivot from this point and do better. So I understand. And then that's how I ended up becoming a psych major, because I got the best sleep in biology class ever. And it wasn't too productive on graduating.
So let me ask you this as we move on in this conversation. I'm curious from both of you, where you learn how to be self-aware, where you learn how to self-regulate, where you learn how to increase your emotional intelligence. That's not something that we're taught in schools. Many of our homes, we're not taught that. And to your point, Fred, not a lot of people have it, right? So when we talk about dating and we talk about women who are looking for men to date who have high emotional intelligence, are we setting women up to look for men with high emotional intelligence? Because is that rare?
I don't know that women understand what a high EI is. I don't know that anybody really understands what a high EI is. I really truly don't believe that it receives the value that it deserves. A high emotional quotient is the key to relational success. It's the key to corporate success. I mean, studies have shown that managers, CEOs who have a high EI advance their company's program to a degree way higher than guys who are the SOBs or the taskmasters and slave drivers of a company. Studies show, and here's another thing. You talked about this, whether or not we're taught EI. And the reality is that we should be taught emotional intelligence, because the area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which controls your cognitive skills, your emotional responses, and your decision making, is anatomically one of the later parts of your brain to actually develop its circuitry. So children can be taught emotional qualities to advance their emotional intelligence as they grow. Studies have shown that 10% of all kids in schools where they teach emotional intelligence, 10% of kids have more pro-social behaviors, less disruptive behaviors. 11% have higher academic scores, and 10% have decreased antisocial behaviors, less violence in schools. So these are skills that can be taught in a developing brain
And
over the years.
because I'm hearing you saying, Fred, not just success in relationships, you're talking about success in careers,
Yes,
friendships.
absolutely.
Okay.
These are all social avenues, right? All avenues in which you have to perform socially. You have to deal with people. And any way in which you have to deal with people, a high EI, a high emotional quotient, is a benefit, right?
Throw out a couple of, because I want to put some on the screen here for those who are listening and then those who will go back and watch. What are some examples of a person, a man specifically, with high EI? Give me a couple of phrases or words.
I'll give you an idea right now, and I happen to consider myself a Sigma man, and this is the only way I will be referring to myself as a Sigma. Trust and believe. But you've heard of an alpha man, and not just from a Greek standpoint. An alpha man is a man who's a dominant type of figure, you know, a physical specimen of a guy, somebody who's going to spread out when he walks into a room and attract attention to himself and take charge. Now, there's a beta man, who's a guy who is less authoritative, less assertive, more likely to be a follower than a leader. And then there's a sigma man, and that's a man who has a high emotional quotient, an emotional intelligence quotient. And this is somebody who's going to take charge intellectually. He doesn't necessarily have to be the most physical specimen. He doesn't have to walk into a room and make his presence known by his mass, his muscularity, or his physicality, or anything like that. He doesn't have to be boisterous or necessarily outgoing, but he's intellectual, he's thoughtful, he's attentive to women, he's attentive to his male friends and their needs, thoughtful and considerate. He has ideas. He's a leader because he's psychologically able. He's intelligent, and he's confident. Above all things, he's confident. He's confident in himself, in his intellect, and also he's confident enough to be emotionally the word I'm looking for is
available,
emotionally available, and not just available, but the word that Murph always uses is vulnerable, right? Vulnerable. He's not the guy is not frightened by being emotional or vulnerable or talking about his feelings or listening, you know. So this is a very strong and confident person. So, and this exhibits a high level of emotional maturity and emotional intelligence.
I have never heard of that definition, but I like it. I can see where it breaks down into, I guess, a deeper level of understanding that you don't need to necessarily scream for or bark for everyone to listen, but when it's time for the thinkers to actually get something done and take thought and turn it into action, you're one of the first ones there and one of the first ones to be reached for every time. No, that's deep.
I personally think that
and I wrote it down.
Rephrase in terms of alpha man, frankly.
Right, I like that.
I wrote down the characteristics or the indicators that you mentioned here, and I would like to say that I have more emotional intelligence than most. But as I look at this list, Fred, I see areas where I'm decent in. So because I'm only decent in that area, that I don't have I'm still in pursuit of a high emotional intelligence, right? I think that I'm intellectual and thoughtful, but areas of being attentive and then areas of being vulnerable, right? I'm decent in, right? And so I think as Fred has shared this definition, men, if you're listening, are you strong in these areas? And it doesn't mean that you are a 10, but are you stronger tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now, in any one of these areas? Intellectually, I'll tell you, between the three of us on this call, not because we're alphas by the Greek letter, but I know that we read often. I mean, we're talking about, what are you reading this week? What are you reading next week? We are constantly putting in information into our system, right? But being intellectual doesn't make us thoughtful. No correlation there. I don't care how many books you read, how great your business is, right? How much money you made this year. It doesn't make you more thoughtful or more attentive, and certainly not vulnerable. So if you are at the top of the food chain, $500,000 earner a year, living $1 million home, but you're not thoughtful or attentive or vulnerable, your draw, whether you're in a relationship or not, your draw to a woman, it ain't gonna be great. So what, you've got the intellectual prowess to have a mansion on 1,000 hills, but you don't have the vulnerability in order to be sensitive and emotional when times that you need, right? So as you mentioned this list here, Fred, I'm looking like, yo, I got the intellect, I got crazy books at the house. I've read 50 in a year before, but I need to step my game up in some of these other areas if I want to be able to have a high emotional intelligence.
Well, you have to realize EI, emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, is a range of abilities, right? Just like I could be a great mathematician or a great student in math. I could have a 4.0, be better at math than I am in social studies because I hate social studies. I could be a great historian because I love, Mesopotamian history, and name something, name Egyptian history, name Greek and Roman history, African history, Egyptian history, the history of the Nile, whatever, but be worse at mathematics. But if I'm self-aware, I'm going to work harder at mathematics, right? If I'm a better mathematician than I am a social studies or name another subject, then if I'm self-aware, I'm going to work on those areas so that I maintain my 4.0, right? I'm going to burn the midnight oil on certain subjects. And this range of abilities, as far as EI is concerned, involves self-awareness, self-management, social skills, empathy. But all in all, it's the ability to put all of this stuff together so that you have a wealth of social skills to help you interact with people in a thoughtful, considerate, patient, right, and creative way in order to have an effective relationship, right? So you have to be able to pull all this stuff together, and on top of it all, you have to have the self-awareness to realize your mood, your emotions, your trauma, as Murph would always say, your trauma, your own personal disorder is going to affect your perception of every circumstance. So you have to sort of somehow find a way to objectively look at each situation. And number one, asking, how am I affecting this situation? Right? It's like having an experiment. You have to do some type of a double-blind experiment so the experimenter doesn't affect the actual experiment. Right? So if I'm the one who's viewing a situation in my household or my wife's behavior, I have to first understand how my own mood may be affecting my perception of her behavior, right? Is her behavior objectively what she's exhibiting, or is my perception of it some type of bastardization of what she's actually saying? And then I have to look at her behavior and say, why might she be acting this way? I have to be willing to interpret her behavior, not necessarily what she is doing, but why. You always have to want to understand why, not the what, but the why. And it may be you. You have to be honest enough to realize that she may be acting the way she is because of you. And you have to turn the light of introspection on yourself to determine whether or not her response is valid. And if it is, you have to admit that to yourself.
Yeah.
So it takes a great deal of objectivity and self-awareness to have a successful relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that piece about knowing if it's you and if it's not you, just being attentive. One of the words you mentioned earlier, being attentive to know what's going on in your house. If the mood seems off, right? Rather than and say, let me ask you one time, and you say nothing is wrong. Well, I'm gonna take you at your word. Nothing is wrong, right? That's what we do as men. What's up? You good? Yeah, I'm good. Okay, we keep it moving. But with the woman, I feel like it's different. You can ask the same question, and she say, "Yeah, I'm good," but we're like,
You know better.
right. So,
know better.
so we have to learn how, in that moment, to be attentive to get to the answer that we're looking for. And sometimes it's not by, hey, tell me what's wrong. Sometimes it's, can I find a way to help lift the weight that's happening in your life? And then you'll probably open up. I know in my household, I'm thinking like, okay, so I'm looking around like, okay, your day's off. You're not in the best of moods. Let me look around the house real quick. What right now, right, to really assist and help bring more harmony to home? Here it is. I'm folding, I'm cleaning, I'm right, all that. And in the midst of doing that, let me tell you, in the midst of doing that, it's like, oh, let me tell you about my day. Oh, okay, cool. I'm folding laundry. Oh, what happened today? Oh, now I'm in the kitchen doing dishes. So you know what else happened? Okay, so now I'm in, sweeping the floor. So as I'm doing the work that helps to lift the weight, if
Yes.
I the conversation that I've been waiting for when I first initially asked what's wrong. So men, sometimes it's not about being so rational. Let me find out what's wrong. I asked the question. You said nothing, so I'm gonna keep moving. You gotta dig deeper.
Yeah.
It's a must, and sometimes that's where we can go wrong, because for some of us, we are surface. To get on this level, it's a tertiary type of thinking, because what you're taking is the original basic human instincts of hunger, thirst, anger, somebody being mad at you in the moment, and you're digging back from that. And so, as Fred was saying earlier, if it's you or your spouse, if your spouse is angry at you, are you trying to first understand? Because sometimes where we fail in relationships is we let that initial anger be what puts the battery in our back, and now we're two dogs barking at a fence. You know what I mean? Your spouse is angry at something that happened at work. Your perception of her anger make you think that she's angry at you. So now, instead of being what you were saying, Doc, with the supportive aspect of how to lift the mood, now you're, all right, she's angry at me, I'm angry at her, and so now you going back and forth. So once you get past that primary level of anger, understanding that the anger exists, and reading the mood, then getting into that secondary level where it's like, okay, um, I'm trying to understand, well, what's the motivation for this anger? Is it me? Is it her? You know what I mean? What did I do? What could I have done better? And then getting to that third level of, okay, now that I understand this is where it comes from, how do we then move forward so that we try to avoid head butting to resolve this? Because sometimes it's like, it's almost like, I would put it like this: in relationships, when they say you ironing it out, you really got to put heat and steam to it. And sometimes it don't need all of that heat and that steam to really get the wrinkles out the way you really need it. So
I would say that, and we've started talking about relationships now. I know, Doc, you're going to lead us in down another path probably in a minute, so you won't let us stay on this too long. But before we go, I would like to say that defensive responses are typically the wrong first response. If you have disagreements or misunderstandings in your relationship, if your first response is out of defensiveness, then you're automatically closing the road to communication, because you've decided before thought, usually, your position. So I've learned a long time ago to, after 29 years of training and 33 years of marriage, I learned to ask myself, could my wife be right? If there's an issue, the question is, you've come a long way when you can explore somebody else's point of view for its validity and ask yourself, do they have a point? And if they do, it takes a whole lot of confidence, man. And that's what EI means, is the confidence to say, honey, you have a point, or either apologize or plan to do something different, or take a different direction with your behavior, or your marriage, or just a different direction in thought, or whatever it takes to solve whatever this particular problem is. But it takes a great deal of emotional security and maturity to admit that you're right, or that somebody else that you're wrong, or even not necessarily wrong, but somebody else has a point, and then move on. It's not the end of the world. If your emotional security and self-esteem is only derived from being right all the time, you're going to have problems. You're going to have
problems.
major problems in life, so you have to get over that.
Yeah, you're right, Fred. I want to kind of take us into this last question, but around relationships. I really like the fact that you and Marv teased out what emotional intelligence is, what it means to be an emotionally quotient couple. But I'm thinking about those who are dating, women specifically, who email us and text us all the time, Fred, with questions to ask on the show. Women are asked questions about red flags. But then I'm wondering in this conversation, how How do women know that they're dating an emotionally intelligent man? Because last week or 2 weeks ago, we heard women suggest that men put out their representative. That we put out who we want them to be. And so they have a hard time sifting through, well, who's the real one? Because you projected this person that you think that I desire. So I'm going to start off by saying, here's a red flag for a woman who's dating a man who you believe is emotionally intelligent, or he says to you that he's emotionally intelligent. Red flag number one, when he shuts down in communication. That's a red flag. What I mean by that is the pleasantries of getting to know one another have now settled in, and you've now known each other 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, however long you've been hanging out. But when an issue in communication comes up, where he's not right, or you're not co-signing with him, and his communication begins to dovetail, and he begins to shut you out, or he minces the conversation, or he leaves the house because he doesn't like the conversation is getting to where it's supposed to go, or he cuts you off in the midst of your conversation. Yes, he can learn to develop the trait of effective communication. However, if you're talking about you ain't got time to be messing around and dating every Tom, Bill, Bob, Jim, Batman, Pookie, and them, if you're trying to figure out how to know some of these signs in the beginning, if he cannot communicate with you well, that's a red flag.
If that's the problem, that's an all system stop, reverse engines, back up, talk about it. But I would suggest you don't proceed any farther than that, because relationships, you just can't have one without communicating. You can't work out problems. You can't plan. You don't know what he's thinking. You just can't. I just can't imagine having a relationship without having a partner. And people may not be equally communicative. Not everybody talks as much as every other person, but there are times when you need to talk. And when you have problems, that's one of them. You'll never find solutions if you can't communicate. If you have issues, you can't find solutions to them if you can't communicate in some way, some form. I don't know if that's verbally or sign language or a note or whatever it takes. If you cannot communicate, that's an issue. That's all systems stop to me.
I like that all systems stop. So Fred, you give one, and then Marv, you give one. I really want to leave our listeners with knowing what those red flags are. I like how you said that, Fred. All systems stop. Let's do that. Let's do all systems stop examples. Not like, oh well, if he doesn't dress well when he arrives to y'all's first date, he's cut off. Like, no, like the brother could have just had a long day and pulled some clothes out the trunk because the clothes he had on dirty from work and it just didn't match, right? Give him another chance. But what are the all stops, reverse pivot, don't waste your time moments that a woman, when she's dating, at least hear from us as to when she should pause, when she should reverse?
I would say for just in any relationship, when you should hit that all stop or that emergency brake button is when you realize that the person cannot understand perspective. Like, I think Fred was alluding to this earlier, someone always needing to be right. And for that to exist, that means someone else has to always be wrong. And when two individuals come from two different backgrounds, you see things from two different points of view. You know what I mean? And what may not make sense to you or may not have worked for you in your background may have worked perfectly fine for someone else. And that's how they're going along with it. And it's about perspective. Like, if you can't see it, if you can't at least try to see it from my perspective or my point of view, if you can't at least try to understand, you know what I mean, what has got me here, whether it's emotionally or conversationally, whether it's I may not need to. I'll give you an example. If, as you said earlier, two people may not be on the same communicative level. One may be more verbally communicative, whereas the other one is more, I need to listen to what you say, and so that I'm not angry, so that I'm not automatically defensive, I'm going to text you back and answer. You know what I mean? The verbally communicative person has to have the perspective of understanding, well, if this is their lane and their lane is not my lane, I have to accept how they're gonna respond. I can't expect to control the what I put out there and how the person responds. So it's that perspective thing. If the person has to allow you to speak within your voice of how you're gonna communicate, but you have to be willing to communicate.
Yeah. For me, brother doctor, it kind of hinges on a couple of things for me, really, and this is what I think a woman should be aware of, and what I would personally be aware of. There's a component of emotional intelligence that is of the self-awareness variety, and this part of the emotional intelligence is the decision-making part of it, and the self-awareness part of it, and all of that prefrontal cortex stuff that allows you to make proper decisions and have some type of a moral compass. Mm-hmm. That's important to me. If that's damaged, I've had patients who've had head trauma, blows to the front of the head, and they just have no social awareness whatsoever. They may start peeing in the parking lot just because they just don't, right in the middle of a parking lot, because they have no social concept whatsoever when it's damaged like that. But when you have people who socially have an inadequacy in this area of development, then it's always about them, but they have no awareness of that. I think you may find narcissists in this group of people. You may find people who are morally deficient in this group of people, because whatever suits them, whatever makes them happy, that's what they're going to be more likely to consider. And to your detriment, if you're their spouse or they're, somebody who they're supposed to care about. And along with that is a lack of empathy, I think is one of the things that would be disturbing to me if I was paired up with somebody who had no real compassion or concern for anybody else. It would make me question whether or not they would have any dedication, compassion, or empathy for me should the time arise that I, had a real significant need. And if they don't have any compassion or empathy for anybody, I wouldn't expect them to really have it for me, or any consideration of my real needs or anything like that. If I was a woman, I'd be very suspect of a man like that, and also would be very wary of having kids with somebody like that who lacked compassion and empathy.
Right. Just one last point. You got to see, I remember I read this thing. It was the 5, we read this in psychology class in undergrad. It was the 5 golden rules of finding a perfect mate. And one of the ones that always stuck out with me was finding out if the person is a meniscus. How do you treat people in which you owe nothing to? So like, how does that person would treat waiters? How would that person treat a parent? You know what I mean? Like, how would that person treat a sick parent? Things like that. Because at the end of the day, they're not going to change too much, you know what I mean, in how they treat that person and how they treat you. If you with a person who, you know what I mean, if within conversation you figured out they abandoned, you know what I mean, relatives in the past, you know what I mean, and not for some you and the relatives are at war, but they just, somebody was going through a difficult time and they didn't want to go through the burden of having to support that person, and they abandoned, you know what I mean, offspring, or they abandoned, you know what I mean, parents who were sick. Like, yeah, I just stuck them in a home because I didn't want to have to deal with that kind of stuff. Then it's almost a sure thing that when it's you on the line, they'll walk away as well, because they don't see that within themselves they need to be tied to helping something that is not beneficial to them, as you said, Fred, earlier. Yes. And it doesn't provide for them, and it's just to help someone else. Yes. Even if if you're dealing with someone who is terminally ill, and at the end of the day, the person is on their last, so regardless of what happened, the person is going. It's just to make sure their last days are a lot more comfortable. To them, it's like, well, they're going anyway, so why should I, you know what I mean, have
Right.
to suffer myself of having to see a person go through that, not looking at it from the point of view like that person might have been a grandmother who, you know what I mean, raised you when your parent was a single, when your mother was, you know what I mean, had you at 15, 16 years old, and that's the house you really came up in, and that's who really fed you your entire life, and that, you know what I mean, that's who really gets you on your feet.
It's just the ability to value people just because they're a person, a human being, you know.
Exactly.
How do you treat people that can do not a damn thing for you?
Mm-hmm.
How do you treat that person who can't do anything for you, period, who can benefit
that's
you?
powerful. No, Fred, that's powerful because I think that the old adage is, I want to watch how he treats his mom. But I love where you and Marv are taking this, because how he treats his mom might be expected. I expect you to treat your mom like that. So if you don't treat your mom the way I expect you, then I know that that's my red flag. But to y'all's point, how do you treat someone who owes you nothing,
Or can do nothing for you?
who do
Yes,
nothing
can do
for
nothing
you,
for
right?
you.
Do you have the
So,
same respect for the
yeah,
janitor that you have for the CEO?
Exactly.
absolutely, man. And I think that's a strength. That's got to be part of the emotional quotient as well, Fred. It's got to be tied and tethered in there somewhere. But I'm just thinking about self, with it becoming self-aware. Am I this person who am becoming better at treating all people with love, dignity, and respect? Take an examination, go through your 24-hour period, and everyone you come in contact with, think about how you treated them. Like I know when I'm driving through New Jersey, they like in New York, in certain areas, they pump your gas for you.
Right.
I wasn't raised. I was raised in D.C. You pump your own gas.
Right.
Somebody pump my gas when I'm going through Jersey, to me has never become, oh, you supposed to do that. No, it's I appreciate you. I know you supposed to do this, but here's a couple extra dollars, right? I grew up, one of my first jobs was bagging groceries in a grocery store. So when someone bags my groceries, I'm like, here's a couple extra dollars, right? Most people wouldn't do those things. So we think about how we treat others throughout our day. And I think that we can strengthen and increase our emotional intelligence. Men, you're listening by what Fred and Marv are saying. How do you treat people in 24 hours in your day, folks that you'll never see again? How do you treat them?
Right. If I'm a woman, I'm watching that. I'm watching how he treats the waiter. I'm watching the way a man treats somebody who, when the service is bad. What do you do when the service is bad? Do you like light up and go crazy on some kid who's serving you a burger or a steak or whatever? Or do you understand that there may be issues outside of this person's control? That's what a high EI is realizing that don't take it out on this kid because it may not be his fault. And even if it is it really worth it? Do you have more common decency than to really berate a kid up one side and down the other, to make somebody look embarrassed and foolish in front of, there's a whole lot of things you should look at that can give you insights into somebody's real character. And that's what you're looking for. But real quick before we go, we're talking about how does somebody recognize a high EI? The problem I find, though, is that there's this broad range of what emotional quotient is, or emotional intelligence is in men and women. Women possess a higher degree of certain components of it, while men possess a higher degree of other components of it. Like women have the social aspect of it, realizing when somebody's upset, having more empathy and sympathy and compassion and that type of thing. Men have more self-confidence, more ability typically to deal with stressful areas in their life. They stand up a little bit with a little stiffer spine sometimes in areas of difficulty. Not that women don't, but men typically feel a responsibility to do that because of the way we're socialized. But the interesting thing is that a whole lot of people aren't taught the emotional intelligence components that they should be from when they should be learning them as their brain is developed. So the question I have is, do women know enough about what's important? Do they really value these less aggressive emotional components that men should have? Or are they always looking for that alpha man, rather than somebody, or they think he's soft. if you got a guy who's emotional during a movie, or somebody who has empathy for a homeless person, or somebody who expresses emotional concern, about anything, how is that interpreted by women nowadays? Or are they always looking for that so-called alpha man, that so-called macho man type of character, rather than somebody who has a high degree of an emotional intelligence? So, like I said initially in the show, this is an undervalued commodity in humanity nowadays. And and rather than having emotional intelligence actually taught by parents and in schools, where it can be a part of a coherent social structure, our culture is what's teaching emotional intelligence. TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, how many likes, how many, how outlandish your behavior is, gets you a boost in self-esteem. So we're not learning how to be compassionate. We're not learning how to be empathetic. We really aren't learning the real elements of emotional intelligence. We're learning the opposite. There's more violence. There's people shooting up places because they're playing car theft, grand theft auto, and these, video games where they're shooting up stuff. We're being desensitized, not emotionalized. We're not learning how to be more emotionally competent. We're learning how to be more violent, more and less emotional, less empathetic. It really is frightening, man. It's frightening where our society is going, because IQs have risen in the last 100 years because of the advent of computers and different cognitive things that kids have to try to grasp nowadays that make them think more and be more cognitively aware. But emotionally, they're being desensitized because they're sitting there doing this. They're having their thinking done for them, or they're being programmed subconsciously by all of this, social media and things that outside of the family, outside of Christianity, outside of church, outside of school, where there's programs that actually teach emotional parenting, concepts that, tend toward a more empathetic and sympathetic and loving society. So we're going down the toilet when it comes to emotional intelligence, I think.
Just to piggyback off what you said, Fred, before we close out, I think what may be happening is we're gaining more access to information at a quicker rate, but we may not be becoming more overall intelligent because we're not processing it. We're not having the ability to process that information and properly use it to our overall benefit. Plus, I think what you're piggybacking off what you said earlier, the reason we may be going down is because we're losing a lot of this EI is because part of it actually has to do with socialization skills. I think for me, I was lucky. I would say I was intelligent as a kid, but my mother will really tell you and my father would probably tell you they just wanted to get rid of me as quickly as possible. So I started school at like 18 months. You know what I mean? So they got me out the house. Yeah, and that socialization happened early for me. You know what I mean? I was already in Cub Scouts by the time I was 3, camping. So that socialization part happened early. A lot of kids aren't being socialized early. And not only is the lack of socialization, but as what you said now, we're shifting and we're giving them tablets and computers. So we're 2Ding the world. It's on a 2-dimensional level instead of 3D with actual humanity. And so we're not teaching that because they're not interacting. Kids aren't having to play with each other. You know what I mean? They're not having to share a ball. So you learn, well, it can't just be your ball. It's everybody's ball. So everybody gets a turn to kick the ball. And so if you made Billy cry because you kind of excluded Billy from the game. So as you grow up, you were aware of Billy's emotions because, you know what I mean, you and Billy grew up together and you saw how, you know what I mean, Billy got emotional because you wouldn't pick him on your team, but Billy sucks.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean? But
Yes.
it's part of that. So you pick him on the team last. Like, Billy, I got you. I'm just gonna get you last so we can get some other players on the squad. You know what I mean? But it's learning that. But we need to, part of that is socialization. And I think, Doc, to what you said earlier, and this is my last point, it's almost an oxymoron if you're looking for someone who, if you're saying that being some people are being programmed or to look at an emotionally intelligent man as weak because he is emotionally available, but yet the paradigm is split, because then you have women who are looking for men who are understanding and emotional in some aspect. Like, you, if he has no feelings towards anything in the world, he's not going to carve out a special slice for you. Like, if he doesn't give a, he doesn't give a about everything.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? There's no, it doesn't create a special halo for you that he's gonna murder the whole world and be a stone cold heartless person to the whole world. But for you, it's all heart
He's
and
a
love.
pussycat, right?
Right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
work
yeah.
that way.
Yeah,
It doesn't work that way.
And nothing about a woman would make a man make those changes unless he was ready to make those changes, right? A woman is like, but I'm dainty, I've got nice curves, I've got a good job, I don't bring him drama, I treat him when we go out every now and again, right? It's nothing you can do tangibly that would make a man make that particular shift, right? It's all
Right.
it's here. He's got to want to make that shift for himself. He has to be self-aware, as you mentioned earlier, Marv, right? He's got to be able to self-regulate, Fred, like you said, when you come home, that you don't just fly off the handle, but you're able to regulate your own emotions, right? But I think as we close out, women, I'm going to leave you with this. You have to also increase your your emotional intelligence. We've been talking about how men can increase their emotional intelligence, but I don't want to get it twisted that just because you were born a woman means that you were born with emotional intelligence. You may have more of it than men, but it doesn't mean that you have reached your zenith either. And I believe wholeheartedly in this. Women, if you increase your emotional intelligence, the energy that you put out because of your increase emotional intelligence begins to attract a different kind of brother. If you are attracting a brother who has low emotional intelligence, it might not be your fault, but it might be your fault. What are you putting out there to attract that same type of brother? It's a different face, different address, different zip code, but it's the same type of brother. How have you increased your emotional intelligence? Because I tell you this, once your emotional intelligence increases, you can see him a mile away. Like,
Yes.
nope. Let me cross the street because this brother about to come over here with that nonsense. He gonna try to give me the he and the high.
Yes.
I'm gonna go on a date and then I'm gonna be disappointed. How do you not see that coming? No, you have sixth sense as a woman. You see that coming. But how high is your emotional intelligence to be able to see him a mile off and be like, this is not anything I'm trying to get myself into?
Exactly.
And we're saying,
I'm gonna leave you with that. But look. I honestly think I've gotten a few text messages since our call tonight. I honestly think, and this is what I think we're going to close out this series, the unspoken truth on why you are single. I think we want to close out the series next week dealing with this emotional piece. But Marv, you mentioned it earlier, and I made a note in my journal about next week being, what does an emotional, unavailable man look like?
oh,
There are a lot of men who are emotionally unavailable. Just because he's single, just because he's never been married, just because he may not have children, doesn't mean he's a great catch. You've got to be able to look at his emotional availability. And that's more than his dossier. That's more than what he drives. That's more than the home he lives in. It's a lot of what we talked about tonight, these points: intellectual, thoughtful, attentive, confident, being vulnerable. But the question is, and I don't think many of you know, we're going to tackle this next week, how do you know if he's emotionally available?
why y'all always do this to me? You always bring up questions like this. You know I got something to say, but I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. See, oh, that's so provocative, man. That's so provocative.
Deep.
I'm not.
I'm telling you, I'm telling you, and I know for women too, women are emotionally unavailable as well. and I have learned those lessons through the pain of going through it. I know that when I was engaged over 10 years ago, both of us were emotionally unavailable, right? But we were in a relationship with one another, trying to patch the pieces, fix the hurt that we had experienced prior to one another.
Wow.
Brought in the hurt to the relationship, right? And we're both trying to fix the hurt in the midst of a new relationship. But hindsight 2020, we were both emotionally unavailable.
Can we just do another 30 minutes? Because I want to hear about that. Another 15.
No, I want to bring that. I want to bring that next week, man.
You're gonna have a lot to say. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's not just us as men. Women are also emotionally unavailable, and I think it's important that we both are honest with each other when we enter dating. Hey, question number one tonight. I'm asking you before the lobster and the crab cake was coming. I know you're single, but let's talk about your emotional availability. Are you available emotionally? And if not, let's just be cool. Let's be friends. We can kick it. We can go ride bikes. Down across. What I'm saying, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. That's about
right.
2 hours. We can ride bikes, but I don't want to wrap my heart up into the potential of this relationship because your moniker says single, but your emotions say unavailable.
That's true.
Please stop. Please stop, because I don't want to. You know me. I'll start talking, and you have to cut me off. So I don't know why you do this.
Hey, so look, no, seriously, next week, man, I want to talk about that brother who's emotionally unavailable, or that sister who's emotionally unavailable. What are the telltale signs? How do we pinpoint it? How do we pick it out? How do we figure it out? Even if we ask the question, do you even know to ask the question? So,
wow.
Be here next week, Marv. I know that you're a doctor now, so you're on the circuit, man. Are you available next week, man? We gotta get into this conversation, and we gotta get Murph into the conversation next week. I wanted to keep this one today small, just the three of us, because it really took us to really dive into this piece here about emotional intelligence. But I think next week, man, bringing on some more guns, talking about emotional unavailability would be dope.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be interesting.
Very interesting.
It's going to be interesting, and a whole lot of this EI plays right into it. Emotional intelligence plays right into it. If you want to identify whether you're available emotionally or not, you have to have a lot of introspection and self-awareness. And if you try and determine whether or not somebody else is available, you have to have those social skills to be able to read a person and try to figure that out. Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting, man. Yeah. I'm interested.
Step one, when you digging in the hole, stop digging.
What you mean digging in the hole? Stop digging.
You have to self-recognition. You have to stop digging. You have to at some point figure out, okay, if it's what I'm doing getting me to where I want to be. So you know what I mean? Do I continue to dig this hole? That's a self-recognition aspect.
Mm-hmm,
stop digging.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we're gonna dig deeper next week.
More digging.
And I'm glad we kind of two episodes ago kind of ended on the sex piece, because I think that when you're dealing with emotional intelligence, and we can tie that into sex too, I think too many men have been giving themselves self victories around areas in our life that may not be on the top priority of women. Right, we've been giving ourselves victories in areas of sex. We're looking for us to have victories in areas of vulnerability, in areas of empathy, in areas of being thoughtful. Right, and so we're giving ourselves too much credit and credence. And this is self-credit. You know what I'm saying? It's self-credit.
Exactly, because a lot of the whole sex thing we was doing wrong, and we thought we was doing it right. Yeah.
Deep stuff. So look, hey, I got y'all on here on my radar next week. Great show tonight. Those who are tuning in at the end, replay this. Like Lita said, look, she said, y'all gave a lot of knowledge and dropped some gems. Like we have fun, but there are moments because we're all intellectuals that we just got to pull back for a minute and just drop some knowledge. And I mean, tonight was one of those nights. So if you missed it, go back and replay this. Emotional intelligence. How do you spot it? What is it? Do you really need it? And then how do you look for it when you're in the dating world? Until next week, we're going to tie that into being emotionally available in a relationship. Some of y'all are in relationships and some of y'all are in marriages now, and one or both of you are emotionally unavailable. However, if you're in a relationship, there is help for you. We talked last week on the need to see therapists, the need to see counselors. We all need to see them, right? There is help for you. But if you're dating and you're trying to figure this dating thing out, being emotionally unavailable, you need to figure out if that's you. Because before you start creating new plenty of fish profiles and what are these other profiles? Tinder profiles and wherever these profiles are, before y'all start creating those, right?
Duct tape profiles.
Question number one is, are you even emotionally available? So,
Absolutely.
all right, y'all. Well, I'll see y'all next week, man. Great show.
Peace and love. I'll see you, man.
All right, brothers.
All right, guys.